And welcome to another edition of the Nerdy Agent Podcast Business Tip of the Week.
It's the time for the business tip. No computers allowed.
Doesn't need it. This week, we are going to continue our home knowledge segment of the business tip. We're going to talk about water in the basement, which we've maybe talked about in the past previously, but we're going to bring it up again. And the scenario is you're in that basement, in an unfinished basement, and the corners of the house appear like they have had water in the past, or maybe there's actually some water in there. What does an agent need to know about water mitigation to make sure they can properly help people solve those problems?
Most people will say, if there's water in the basement, it's the worst thing ever. Or when clients ask, I have it all the time, has there been water in this basement? And I'm like, well, it was built in 1954, so in the last 70 years, yes. Yep, there's been water in the basement at some point. And I think that's an important thing to say because it does help buyers understand and let their guard down. I'm not saying like tell them it's not a big deal, but you can tell them it's very likely that there's been water in the basement if it's a super old house. And most, I think, consumers or agents will spring to either that's the worst thing in the world, or if they're going to fix it, they will say, just put a drain tile and sump pump in here. I'm on the team of not doing that right away because not only do drain tile and sump pump invite water into your house, but when a storm is at its worst is typically that's when the power is going to go out. So if the power goes out on your sump pump, your pit's going to fill up and it's going to flood your basement. I've had it happen to clients before. It's not pretty.
It's also the most expensive option, probably.
Yeah.
It could get worse than a drain tile sump pump system, but most of the time when you get to that point, it's kind of like a last-ditch effort, because we actually had a conversation earlier, and it was a driveway right up against the foundation side of the house. One of the only options is a sump pump system in that situation. So it's not that you shouldn't ever use them, it's that you should go through the steps first to try and solve it the other ways, because 95% of the time it can be solved with these other options.
Yeah, I mean, most houses, at least here locally, we do have some where they have a hill in the backyard or in the front or whatever. You know, if you have a lot with a factor that a sump pump really is your only option, that's a thing.
Most of the time, that's not the case.
No, like I live on a walkout. When we ripped out the basement in our house, you could clearly see there'd been a ton of water in the basement. There was effervescence kind of all the way up the wall, which would suggest that there had been water down there. And instead of doing a drain tile and a sump pump, I decided to put 4-inch seamless gutters on my whole house, bury all my downspouts, which now are buried all the way to the back of my property line. So once my gutters go on after my project I'm doing, all the water that comes off my roof is going to go like 200 feet away from my house and 20 feet below the bottom of my basement. So it's like so far away. The other thing that you need to do, and making sure that they're clean, right? Because a lot of people don't do that. I talked to a client today about a potential water problem. He's not getting it yet, but he's being proactive, which I love. And he's saying, my grade's not great. Oh, and I also went on the roof and the gutters were clogged full of crap. You got to make sure that they're clean and running. I encourage everybody, if you have gutters, go outside in the middle of a rainstorm and make sure they're working. Make sure that the connections are good and they're not just leaking into one spot. Because the worst thing you can do is put gutters on and then dump all the water into one location. You're better off with no gutter at all in that case. Most homes, gutters will solve a lot of your problems. The other thing you can do is regrade around the outside of your house. So that just means getting good slope on your dirt that makes it so that the water, if it does land next to your house, it runs away from your house rather than towards your house. I'd say 75% of the inspections we do, there's negative grade or flat grade somewhere around that house. It's very, very common. It's one of the easiest things to fix. It's just labor and dirt most of the time. Not super difficult. Also, don't think that by piling your mulch up at a slope is going to help you. You need to pack down the dirt. Some people will even suggest putting plastic down. There's a lot of different options you can do, but grade on the outside of your house coupled with good gutters that are clean, downspouts that run far away, either buried or just run far away on the side of your house, should help you quite a bit. And it honestly won't require the use of a sump pump or drain tile. And another mechanical item that you have to take care of, you have to worry about if your power goes out or anything like that.
You have to pay for it.
You have to pay for it. And it's expensive, too. It's several $1,000s to install a drain tile and a sump pump. In a finished basement, it's even worse. If you do have a sump pump, and it's new construction code here in Minnesota, so you need to have a sump basin. The majority of those homes are going to have a pump. For an extra like $1,200 with the sump pump company or waterproofing company, they will put in what's called a battery backup. I suggest it to literally every client when they're going to buy a house with a sump pump, because what it does is it kicks on if power is lost to that pump. So again, big rainstorms, everybody that's listening knows that in a big rainstorm is the greatest chance of the power going out because tree branches fall down on power lines or on transformers and things just happen. And that's when your power goes out. Well, if your power goes out and your sump is filling up, basin's filling up fast, you're going to have to get a 5-gallon bucket and start ditching it outside. Otherwise, it's just going to fill up above the floor and go everywhere. So that's why we don't love them or put them in. Even in our own rental properties, we grade the outside of the house, we put gutters on, we get good downspouts, and we usually don't have any problems.
We have one drain tile sump pump system, and it's because the driveway is directly up against the foundation, and we tried every other thing before we got to that point.
And the deck is on the back of the house, and it's impossible to grade underneath this deck because it's 2 feet of space.
The last thing that I'd put out there is, well, if you are putting soil around the foundation to regrade it, some people will also say add a few hostas because they soak up water and they're super easy to maintain. Funny enough, you put a plant there, it's going to actually soak some of that water up that would have been going towards your foundation, and so that's another way to help that.
Trees in your yard, like lots of things will help with a lot of these problems. There are certain situations like the one that I talked about with my client today where maybe you do have a pretty large hill, and if you can't knock that down, cutting in French drains or swales and filling up holes with sand and gravel
before you even get to the house.
Exactly. So it just runs in the yard down to a spot where you've cut a kind of a French drain and there's a trench, and it will have corrugated plastic that will fill up, put a little sleeve over it so it doesn't get junk in it, and it can run to a certain location that might just be a big deep hole. Like on mine at the bottom of my hill, where more than half the water off my roof line is going to go, they dug a huge hole before they put that finished drain, like pop-up drain, and they filled it with gravel and sand so that if that thing's really overflowing and working a lot, it's not just going to sit on top of my yard, it's going to filter through into the ground. So
that's a fantastic system.
Wonderful.
That's really cool. That's all we have this week on the Nerdy Agent Podcast Business Tip of the Week.
Helping you keep your water out of your house.